Coming at Wait's going to spend the next few minutes discussing different types of abuse that goes by acronyms. Risa and Edwina are back from Ho'oko LLC with straight talk about an issue that goes by DV and IPV. So some people out there are going, what in the world is that? So please fill us in.
Hey. So, IPV stands for intimate partner violence and DV stands for domestic violence. And both of them are used synonymously these days, although they've had different origins. Back in the 1970s, DV was the word or the acronym that was originally used to describe the violence between a husband and a wife. In around 2000, IPV was introduced to describe violence that occurs between more than just a husband and wife, but in any type of intimate partner relationship. And so today, whether we refer to IPV or DV, we're talking about a cycle of violence that is manifested through controlling tactics and abuse, and that is seen in emotional intimidation, it's seen in physical abuse, it's seen in economic abuse, and it's seen in non-consensual sexual behavior. So those types of things are what we would refer to when we say IPV or DV.
Seems like it's really broadened out from the original meanings connoted with that. What type of statistics are we talking about currently?
Within the United States, according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, there's about 10 million victims per year of DV. So that kind of equates to 20 victims every minute. In addition to that, unfortunately, most of the victims are women between the ages primarily of 18 to 24 years old. It really affects about 10 million victims per year. It takes a huge part of violent crimes each year, and unfortunately, because of this type of violence, about 21 to 60% actually lose their jobs because they are victims of domestic violence. So it's quite staggering numbers that are out there.
And the ripple effect of it, some violence would be more obvious for anyone else to recognize, but with the emotional, what are some of the warning signs that people should be thinking about when they really look at their own relationships?
Well, sometimes people don't realize that when partners put the other partner down, that's a form of an emotional abuse. People might laugh it off or make light of it, or they might even make excuses for their partner behaving like that or saying kind of jokes that are not really that funny. We might have people who are always nervous about their partner being upset or making them upset or getting home on time. We have situations that there's extreme jealousy or possessiveness. Some folks even follow their partners, wait at their working place, those kinds of things. And so the partner who's being abused may also have marks of some sort that we don't know where they've come from. They have mood changes, and they often stop connecting with their friends and family.
Then people at home are thinking, why do they stay in that? But I know there's a lot that goes into every relationship.
Absolutely. I think out there's a lot of misconceptions on why someone would choose to stay, especially in an extremely violent situation or relationship. But there are actually quite a bit of reasons why a victim would choose to stay. I mean, first of all, there's a tremendous amount of fear. Fear for their lives, fear for their children, and legitimate threats that if they're released, something horrific would happen to them physically. Another reason why folks choose to stay is also due to finances as well, too. So oftentimes, because domestic violence really realms around the area of power and control, a lot of times victims do not have the resources to actually financially take care of themselves, thus making them and forcing them to actually stay in that type of relationship. And for some others, there's also, even though the relationship may be abusive and ongoingly like that, some are actually also hoping that there might be change happen, that maybe one day he or she will understand things, they'll change, they'll make things better. But oftentimes what actually happens is they're continuing on the same ongoing cycle of abuse.
It's true. The thinking is ups and downs of
yes.
any relationship. So how can you support someone who might be going through this?
Right. So you really don't want to, you want to acknowledge that the abuse is going on, first of all. You don't want to minimize or judge or condemn them for staying or question their motives or, reasons for doing that. Often there's children involved as well. And so making the decision is not just around the adults, but also the children, how they are going to be affected. But you want to try to get these kinds of people help. help if you can. Refer them to someone who either is trained or specializes in working with IPV or DV, and those folks can really help them to create an action plan or a safety plan of sorts that would protect them if in the event that they do need to step out of the relationship quite quickly at that. The other thing is they can call our center. Our center offers those services. They can call our office, 808-375-7712, or connect with us on the internet, www.hookollc.com.
Lisa and Edwina, thank you so much for always coming back and talking about some very important topics here on Living It. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.